So after the podcast last week, I actually went and played Space Raiders for the GameCube. It's actually like a Space Invaders reboot that came out, so like 2004-ish, although it was originally a PS2 game in Japan and Europe apparently. And it's not super great of a game, but it is entertaining in some ways. So it's essentially very original Space Invaders-ish. You kind of stay at the bottom of the screen, go back and forth. You have like these barriers that appear, and you shoot up at the invaders coming down from the top screen. However, it is very visually different because it was a reboot of that game. And so basically, in a very mid-2000s way, they're like, we got to make this really cool, serious, have a really cool opening CG. And so you have like this whole like story about these invaders coming in and attacking Earth, and you have 3 different characters, and they all have their motivations. You know, one is like a teenager who gets all his friends all die. The other one's like a biker girl who's looking for her lost husband, and then the other one's like a police officer who has an entire squad wiped out by the invaders. So they give you like this backstory in the CG, and it's actually pretty fun. And the dialogue that throughout the story, it has a very like House of the Dead style to it. It looks like very, very goofy and fun, although it is very like spaced out in a way. There's like basically a cutscene at the beginning and end of each chapter, and there's 5 chapters in total, but they're all pretty short. So you get through the game, and there's just not a lot that really has happened. But there's no like talking in between the missions and stuff because it is, or like during the missions. So it really is just limited to like this, like, you know, maybe like 5 to 10 lines per character. So maybe not as much goofy dialogue as you might hope. But you basically can play through the game as one of these 3 characters. They each have their own stats and skills, things like that. And you just go basically from start to finish. There's some boss fights you can do in there. And there's you know, various power-ups. You have like a rapid fire, a laser gun you can pick up, the ability to get like an invincibility thing where you can't take damage for a little while, create a clone, things like that. But, you know, more or less, it is all just straight roads that you're shooting up. So, like, it's an alleyway, a street, you know, you're not moving around in the environment in any kind of dynamic, interesting ways kind of thing. So, pretty much a straight shot in that regard. So, what is actually kind of interesting about this game, and maybe, like, the hardest thing to interact with, is that it does have, like, a combo system. So, as you shoot enemies, you have a combo meter that builds up. And that combo, deals more damage the higher it gets. If you get 10 hit combo, you do more damage. If you get 50 hit combo, you do more damage. Things like that builds up. However, you can only keep that combo if you don't miss a shot, and then also if you don't take a hit. So it's very strict in that regard. So you have to basically play the game pretty almost perfectly in some ways. And you do have like dodge mechanics and things like that, but they're just not nearly good enough to really, I think, handle the intense pressure the game puts on you to go. So like I can't imagine too many people really being able to get into the combo system of this game super well, or even really get that big into like the high score aspect, because I mean, maybe it's just as my skill set showing and me not being very good, but it seems very hard to get through that game without dying. And while there's unlimited continues in the story mode, it does reset your high score. If that matters is kind of a question that I feel like might be up in the air. If I look at the evidence online of like what is out there about the game, the impression I get is the high score does not matter at all. It's just there if you want to get a high score. However, when you play through the game, you go through the story with each character, and the story is largely the same for each character, including the last cinematic sequence. It is literally the same cutscene, but the character is basically like put in there, like a different character is basically put in there. So, the cutscene is not a particularly like, it doesn't leave them in a good spot really. If anything, it leaves them in a bad spot because the invaders are still coming. They still don't really have any great answers to their questions. And that's just the end of the game as far as I can tell. Spoilers. It's like an hour long to beat or whatever, and it's not that important. I kind of skipped the important part of the spoilers even with that. But anyways, so yeah, it's just kind of is a bad ending. So, you know, most people I looked up online really struggled to get through this game. So I wonder if you get a high enough score, or if you like get to the story mode without dying, if there might be a different ending. But I don't find any evidence of that online. And in the modern day, on a game like that is like very aware and around, I really don't trust that there would be anything that people don't know about in that regard. However, in saying that, one thing I did find out people did not talk about online at least, is that at least in the GameCube version of this game, you can actually get alternate costumes on. So if you press the start button when you are selecting a character instead of the A button, their costume changes. And I could not find any information about that online about the game. And then also in the PS2 version of the game, this is some information I did find online, you can actually play the original Space Invaders on the title screen by putting in a button code input, basically. But in the GameCube version, you can't, which is weird to me, because if it's a port, it would make sense that they'd bring that over. That's not to say they had to, though. They very much could have not. But I'm like, I don't know what that button combination is, and I tried so many different combinations trying to think of what would replicate that PS2 button input, and could not find it, unfortunately. So yeah, I kind of wonder if there are more things about this game that really isn't talked about online. I'm sure somebody's seen it at some point, which is like, is it just like something that's not super prevalent online that you can find? So that's something I was thinking about just with that game a little bit. But anyways, it's kind of like a fun thing. Like I mentioned, it's like an hour long. So I think if you're just like, if you do get a copy, just like expect to sit down, treat it like an arcade experience. It's a little drawn out and like a way that like a House of the Dead game doesn't really draw out, but it feels a little drawn out with that regard. But it's still like a good fun time, I think, generally for like that 1 hour you play it. You don't need to go and play through it on all 3 characters unless you're just really curious about what each character plays like. But spoilers, they mostly play the same outside of some very specific like mechanics they might have in regards to a special attack they can do. Nagi is probably the most interesting because he gets these little orbs that basically can act as deflectors that shoot bullets back at the bosses and things like that too. So anyways, that was that. Kind of fun.